My name is Claire Parker. I'm 44 years old, and if you ask anyone in my neighborhood who I am, they'll probably say something like, "Oh, Claire? She's the one who always brings food to church. Baked lasagna with the perfect cheese crust. Banana bread in those cute little paper trays." Or Claire, sweet woman, very loyal to her family, quiet, keeps to herself. They'd be right and also completely wrong. Because last month, while carrying a foil-wrapped tray of chicken casserole to my in-laws' house, I discovered I wasn't just supporting a family. I was feeding the lie that replaced me. I had no reason to suspect anything. That morning, Ethan, my husband of nearly 20 years, had kissed me on the forehead and said, "Make sure Mom gets something to eat today, yeah? I think she's been skipping meals again." It wasn't unusual. Ever since his father passed, I'd stepped up to help her. She never really warmed to me, but I chalked that up to grief or maybe generational differences. I'd been raised to believe that love is what you do, not what you say. So I kept showing up. That day, I'd made a roasted chicken casserole with caramelized onions, her favorite. It sat warm in my lap on the drive, smelling like the effort I'd poured into it. Not just the cooking, but the trying. Trying to be good enough, helpful enough, family enough. It was drizzling. One of those gray, moody spring afternoons. I parked outside the small white brick house and walked up the familiar porch steps. I rang the doorbell. Silence. I knocked gently, balancing the tray in one hand. Still nothing. Then the door cracked open. A little girl, maybe 6, maybe 7, peeked out from behind the door frame. She had soft curls pulled into 2 puffs and wide brown eyes that blinked up at me curiously. Before I could even speak, she tilted her head and asked, "Are you here for Daddy too?" Something inside me paused. The kind of pause that doesn't come from confusion, but from knowing deep in your bones that the ground beneath you just shifted. I knelt slightly, placing the casserole on the porch railing. My voice came out thin, polite. "Sweetheart, what's your daddy's name?" She beamed. "Ethan Parker. He said I get ice cream if I wait upstairs." And just like that, the world I thought I knew exploded. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just the name. It was the way she said it. Comfortably. Familiarly. As if she'd said it 1,000 times. As if she'd lived with it.
Isterta.
Every detail began to feel like a clue I'd missed. She looked nothing like me. Nothing like my son Alex, who was 16 and built like his father. Tall, lean, sharp-jawed. This girl had different bones, a different kind of softness. But she had Ethan's smile. That slightly lopsided grin I used to find charming, before it became something I saw less and less. "Is your mom home?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded and skipped away, leaving the door ajar. And I fooled that I was stepped inside. The living room was decorated. Not just lived in, but built with intention. Cozy touches. Framed photos. A backpack by the couch. A TV playing cartoons with the volume low. A second life. Built carefully. Like a house inside a house. A home, one I had never stepped foot in. A moment later, a woman walked into the room. Early 40s maybe. Dressed in jeans and a soft lavender sweater. Her expression tightened the second she saw me. "You must be Claire," she said. She didn't sound surprised. I could barely breathe. "And you are?" I asked, even though I already knew. She took a breath like she'd been preparing for this conversation for years. "My name's Marissa. I was Ethan's partner." My legs gave way, and I sank into a chair I didn't remember walking toward. "Partner." She nodded. "For 9 years. 9 years. That meant he was with her when we went to marriage counseling. He was with her when I miscarried our second child. He was with her when he told me he just needed space. And I cooked dinner. I held our family together. I raised our son mostly alone while he traveled for work. I stared at Marissa. Did you know about me? Yes, she said quietly. I told him I wouldn't live like a secret. He said he was handling it. I'm sorry, Claire. Truly. You didn't deserve this. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to cry. But instead I stood up, walked out the door, and left the casserole behind on her kitchen counter, like some sick offering to the altar of betrayal. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember the rain picking up, or the tears I must have shed behind the wheel. I only remember getting into the house, taking off my coat, and walking straight to Ethan's travel drawer, the one he always kept locked, but must have forgotten in his rush to pack last week. Inside, tucked between receipts and travel-sized toothpaste tubes, was a crumpled piece of paper. A child's drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands. One labeled Daddy, the other me. The third crossed out. Mom. I sat down on the floor and let out a sound I'd never heard myself make before. Something between a sob and a laugh. Even his child didn't know who I was. But beneath the drawing there was something else. An envelope. Heavy. Legal paper inside. My name was on it. And something about it, the font, the formatting, felt official. I didn't open it yet. I couldn't. Because right then, all I could do was lie on the floor of our bedroom, the one he'd barely slept in for the past 6 months, and realize that my marriage had ended long before that little girl answered the door. I just hadn't been invited to the funeral. I thought I was the wife, but I'd been dismissed in every way but legally. And the only thing left of my marriage might just be the paper I was still holding. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there on the edge of our bed, the unopened envelope still in my hand, the drawing on the floor. I watched the sky go from black to a pale gray, and when the birds started chirping, I knew it was morning. But inside me everything still felt midnight. At 7:14 a.m. Ethan called. The name flashed across my screen like a joke I wasn't in on. Ethan, husband. I didn't pick up. A minute later a text. Did you drop off the food? Mom said she didn't see you. I stared at the message for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I felt nothing. That cold, clean emptiness women often find after the fire has already burned through everything. Later that morning I stood in the kitchen and made myself coffee. Same cup. Same creamer. Same silence. Except now I could see the cracks in everything. I looked around the house, the one I maintained, I cleaned, I filled with life. Every photo on the walls told a story of a woman who was trying. The vacation photo from Maine, I planned it. He canceled last minute. The birthday dinner where I smiled next to him, he'd spent it texting. The family Christmas card from 2020, he was photoshopped in. Every time I asked for closeness, he gave me duty. Every time I asked for truth, he handed me distraction. And I accepted it. Not because I was naive, but because I believed in the version of love that sacrifices. And no one tells you how that version often ends. With you sacrificing so much, you vanish. I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a property deed. At first I didn't understand it. It wasn't for our home. It was another address. I looked it up online. It was Marissa's address. The house I just walked into. The house where her daughter lived. The house with framed photos of Ethan on the walls. The legal document said it was purchased 5 years ago. And then I saw the cosigner. My name. My signature. I blinked. Then blinked again. He'd used me. Used my credit. My legal status as his wife. My financial trust. He hadn't just lied. He'd built his second life on my back. My body went hot. Then cold. I called the bank. Pretended I was reviewing past documents. And there it was, a loan 5 years ago tied to both our names. Monthly payments were being made from a shared account, I hadn't checked in years because Ethan handled the investments. That house was mine. Technically. Legally. Quietly. The woman who cooked the meals, raised the son, and sat alone on anniversaries was also the woman who unknowingly funded the affair. I remember just sitting there, phone pressed against my cheek, listening to the bank representative confirm what I already knew. Yes, ma'am. That's your name listed as primary guarantor. My hands went cold around the coffee mug. My voice didn't tremble when I said thank you and hung up. Instead, a thought formed. Not rage. Not revenge. Something sharper. Strategy. Flashback. 5 years ago, Ethan had told me he was making a smart real estate move. Said he needed to act fast and couldn't put it under his name for business reasons. I was working 12-hour shifts at the time, trying to meet a deadline for a corporate rebrand project. He slid the papers in front of me during dinner. Just sign, babe. You trust me, right? And I did. Like an idiot wearing loyalty as a badge. I signed. I remember now. I even apologized for not reading it more closely. When Alex came home from school, I was in the kitchen still silent. He asked what was wrong. I said, nothing that hasn't been wrong for a long time. He looked at me carefully then said, is it Dad again? I didn't respond. He didn't ask again. I know my son has seen more than I gave him credit for. Later that evening, Ethan came home. Suit jacket slung over his arm, tie loosened. He looked normal. Like the version of him I'd built excuses around for years. He walked in with a soft smile and said, hey babe, smells like you made something good. You always know how to take care of people. The irony made my throat burn. I stood at the counter drying a dish and said, I dropped off food yesterday. He nodded, distracted. I said it again, slower. I dropped off food yesterday. At your mother's house. He froze. I turned around, watched his eyes do the math. And then I said it. Your daughter has your smile. His face dropped. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. Don't lie. Not this time. He stood there like a child caught stealing, unsure whether to cry or run. I continued. I met her.
I met Marissa.
She told me everything. And before you say it, yes, she knew about me. But I didn't know about her. That's the difference. Silence. A heavy, humid kind. I walked toward him not to plead, but to confirm something. Tell me the truth. How long? Almost 10 years, he whispered. I laughed. Not out of humor. Out of disbelief. So while I was losing our baby, you were building another family? No response. You stood beside me in that hospital bed, held my hand, and then what? Drove to her house. Still nothing. I didn't just lose a child, Ethan. I lost time, truth, and myself. He stepped forward. Claire, don't. You don't get to fix this with soft words. You lost the right to talk to me like I'm still yours. He slept on the couch that night. I lay awake again. Only this time not empty. Not erased. This time I was processing. Connecting dots. Remembering receipts. Remembering who I was before I became just the wife on paper. The next morning I packed a small suitcase and drove to my best friend's house. I didn't explain much, just said, I need time. And a lawyer. And she, God bless her, didn't ask questions. Just made tea and gave me the guest room. That night, I opened my laptop and typed in the address from the deed. I stared at the listing photo of the house. And I whispered to myself, if I own the walls, maybe I finally own the truth too. 2 days later, I returned to the house I once called family. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see if the silence I'd always excused was, in fact, something louder I'd been ignoring. I carried nothing this time.
No casseroles. No banana bread.
Just the truth. and an ache I didn't yet know how to name. Ethan's mother opened the door. She looked surprised, but not in the way someone looks when they're caught off guard. More like surprised I had the audacity to come back. "Claire," she said flatly, "we weren't expecting you." I nodded. I figured. I stepped inside without waiting to be invited. The house was quiet, tidy, too perfect like always. For years, I'd cleaned these floors, dusted these shelves, folded napkins for holiday dinners while Ethan disappeared for work trips. Every corner whispered things I used to ignore. She followed me into the kitchen. I turned to her. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her expression didn't change. She folded her hands, leaned against the counter, and said without remorse, "It wasn't my place." My mouth dropped slightly. "You knew, didn't you?" I didn't ask questions. Ethan's life is his own. "But I'm his wife." She shrugged. "Sometimes, Claire, people drift apart. It happens. You're both adults." I looked around the kitchen. I remembered making her soup when she had the flu. I remembered sitting across this same table while she complained about lazy women who didn't know how to keep a home. And yet, the woman her son built a second life with? She accepted her. "Did you ever even like me?" I asked. She didn't answer. That silence was louder than any insult. I pulled out my phone, opened the deed photo, and held it up. "You knew he bought her a house. Did you know he used my name to do it?" She blinked. For a second, just a second, her composure cracked. That's between you and him." I lowered the phone. My voice dropped too. "He used me. He lied. He stole. And you let it happen. You smiled in my face while your son made me a shadow in my own life." She sighed. "Claire, you're making this more dramatic than it needs to be." That sentence hit me like a slap. Because that's what women like me hear when we start asking for the truth. "You're being dramatic. You're overreacting. You're too emotional." I reached for the edge of the counter to steady myself. "Do you know what it's like to sit next to someone every night at dinner and realize they were never really there?" She said nothing. "Do you know what it's like to bring food to a house where your husband's second daughter opens the door?" Still nothing. I stared at her. "You accepted my casseroles but never accepted me." I left the house without another word. As I drove home, I realized I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I was clear. Clarity is the strangest kind of grief. Not loud, not overwhelming. Just clean. Sharp. Final. That night I walked into our house, my house, and saw Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, looking like someone who knew the clock was ticking. "You went to Mom's?" he asked. I didn't answer. He stood, came toward me. "Claire, I was going to tell you." I cut him off. "You didn't just cheat, Ethan. You wrote me out of the story while still using my name on the cover." He swallowed hard. "You used my body, my money, my love, and gave your heart to someone else. Tell me, what did I ever get from you that wasn't borrowed or broken?" He didn't answer. I sat across from him. Calm now. A kind of terrifying calm I don't think he expected. "I'm not yelling because I'm done being the one who has to prove I'm worth honesty," he whispered. "I didn't want to hurt you." I smiled cold. "Then you shouldn't have made me the silent investor in your secret family." He tried to apologize again. But I stood up, walked past him, and said one final thing before going upstairs. "I'm going to fix this. But I'm not fixing it for us. I'm fixing it so I can finally be seen. Not as your wife, but as a woman who gave too much, and finally stopped." That night I called a lawyer. Her name was Danielle, recommended by a friend from work. I told her everything, from the co-signed deed to the affair, to the years of silence. And she said the most validating sentence I'd heard in years. "Claire, you have every legal and emotional right to reclaim your power." We met the next day in her office. Danielle was sharp, efficient, and utterly unfazed by my story, not because it wasn't shocking, but because she'd heard far too many like it. Women erased while doing everything right. Wives whose names existed only to make men's lives easier. She tapped her pen on the deed and said, "Technically, Claire, you own that house. If your name is first, and it was co-signed under marital assets, it's yours." I nodded. She leaned in. "The question is, what do you want to do with it?" That night I didn't cry. I didn't stew. I planned. 'Cause sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's not fire or fury or public shame. Sometimes revenge is a woman walking into the life that was stolen from her, holding the receipt. For years I had been the wife. In family photos. On holiday cards. At his side during funerals, baptisms, and job promotions. I was the emergency contact. The co-signer. The woman he introduced at weddings as my rock. But none of that stopped him from building a second life where I was an afterthought. So now I was going to become what he feared most: visible, accountable, unforgiving. Danielle, my lawyer, walked me through everything. You co-signed the deed. The loan payments were made from marital accounts. That property is fair game. Fair game? I asked, almost amused. Claire, you legally own more of that house than the woman who lives in it. I sat back in her office chair, stunned. Not because I didn't understand the facts, but because I finally understood my power. He didn't expect me to fight back. He didn't even expect me to notice. But now that I had, everything would change. The next morning I drove to the house. Her house. The one with the pale blue shutters and a porch swing I used to think was charming. I stood on the steps for a long moment, envelope in hand. The door opened before I could knock. It was Marissa. She froze. There was no malice in her face, just weariness. Like a woman who knew she too had been living a lie, but one she chose to believe in. I'm not here to scream, I said quietly. She nodded, opened the door wider. Come in. The little girl, her daughter, peeked from the staircase, then quickly disappeared. I sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I'd once left a casserole steaming with shame. This time I placed something different between us. The deed. Her eyes scanned it. When she saw my name, she went pale. This house, it's in your name, she whispered. I nodded. I didn't know until last week. Silence. I thought you signed it for him, she added. I assumed he told you. He told me it was a business property. I was busy. I trusted him. She sat back in her chair. I watched her crumble. Not with guilt, but with realization. I didn't ask to be lied to, she finally said. I replied, neither did I. And for the first time we were no longer rivals in pain. We were co-survivors of the same man's selfishness. I slid the deed forward. I'm not here to throw you out tonight. I'm not that cruel. But legally, I could. She blinked. So why are you here? Because I'm done disappearing, I said. I'm giving you 60 days to vacate. But I'm not the enemy here. Ethan is. She was quiet, then asked, almost hesitant, what do you want from him? I looked her in the eyes. Nothing. I want what's mine. My peace. My dignity. My name without the stain of his secrets. We sat there, two women, both discarded in different ways. I stood to leave. But before I walked out, I turned back and said, you raised his daughter. I raised his son. Maybe it's time she learns what a real woman looks like. That night Ethan came home. I was waiting at the dining table. The deed now placed under a folder labeled separation of assets. He saw it and his face drained. Claire, please, don't beg. I'm not staying to be begged. He reached for the folder. I stopped him. You lied to me. You used me. You spent years building a life that made me legally accountable for your infidelity. His voice broke. I just didn't know how to end it with her. And I didn't want to lose you either. I almost laughed. You didn't want to lose benefits. You lost me the minute you chose silence. He looked around the house, the one I managed, paid for, filled with love. And maybe for the first time he realized none of it belonged to him. Because a woman who builds everything quietly is often the one who can take it all apart with equal silence. The next day I changed the locks. Not out of vengeance, but as a legal move confirmed by Danielle. I'll forward the paperwork, she said. Let him see what it feels like to be locked out of his own lies. I also blocked his access to our joint accounts and rerouted the rest of my paychecks to a private account under my name only. I canceled the secondary cards he carried, the auto renewals he never bothered to check. I kept a log. Every item, every expense, every favor I'd done that had once felt like love but now read like debt. I wasn't just divorcing him. I was divesting from him. I filed for separation. I changed my power of attorney. Reclaimed my credit accounts. Had his name removed from everything that carried mine. And each document I signed felt like a page turning. Not an ending, but a beginning. Authored by a woman no longer willing to be invisible. I spent evenings organizing years of receipts, legal records, and old emails. I reviewed every financial statement, every joint asset. For the first time in decades, I was auditing the life I thought we had, and discovering how much of it had been built on omission. And it wasn't just the house. There were business accounts, charity donations, even private school inquiries, all in my name, none of which I had agreed to. His second life was not a fling. It was an institution, propped up by my signature and my silence. And now both were gone. I didn't tell Alex everything, but I told him enough. He looked at me, no judgment in his eyes, just something sharper, relief. You don't have to explain, he said. I've seen enough. I just want you to be happy, Mom. I hugged him tighter than I had in weeks, maybe months. And I knew this. Ethan may have built another family, but he lost the only one that counted. A week later, Marissa called. I wanted to thank you, she said. For what? For not being cruel. For giving me time. For showing me what standing up looks like. I didn't say anything at first. Then I asked, did he ever love either of us? She was quiet for a long time. Finally she said, I think he loved the reflection he saw in our loyalty. Not us. And I knew she was right. We talked for nearly an hour about womanhood, about betrayal, about survival. Two women once kept apart by a lie, now bound by the aftermath. We weren't friends. But we weren't enemies either. Before hanging up, I told her something I'd been holding in. Make sure your daughter never forgets her mother's worth. Because one day she might be asked to forget it for a man. That night I sat at my kitchen table. Alone. But it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like ownership. Of space. Of silence. Of the woman I used to be before his shadow stretched over everything. I picked up a pen, opened a blank journal, and on the first page I wrote, I was the legal wife, the invisible one, until I stopped asking to be seen, and decided to look in the mirror. Some stories deserve a courtroom. Mine deserved a living room. 3 weeks after the truth unraveled, I invited Ethan, Marissa, and his mother to sit in the same space, on my terms. Not to plead. Not to scream, but to clarify roles, to declare an ending, to finally force accountability from every direction it had always evaded. Danielle warned me, you don't owe them this. And I knew that. But this wasn't about what I owed. It was about what I had carried, and what I was ready to lay down. It was a rainy Saturday, the kind of afternoon that settles quiet over the neighborhood like a warning. My house was spotless, scent of lemon polish and fresh tea. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted them to sit in the kind of order I had always offered and been denied. They arrived separately. Marissa came first, dressed modestly, uncertain, holding a folder I knew contained her own questions. Ethan's mother followed, stiff-backed and polite, holding onto her pearl clutch like it was a shield. Ethan came last. Late, of course. His tie was crooked. His eyes were bloodshot. But he still walked in like he expected me to crack. He still didn't understand the woman who had emerged from the ruins he built. I didn't offer snacks. I didn't pour tea. I sat at the head of the room. They sat in a line across from me like the world's most ironic family photo. And then I placed 3 things on the table. The deed to the house Marissa lived in. The statement showing joint funds used without my knowledge. The separation paperwork. Ethan reached for the documents. I placed my hand over them. You don't touch what you never respected. Silence. I looked at Marissa. I've given you 60 days. That stands. But I suggest you use them wisely. This house, the payments, none of it was yours. It was mine. Purchased under a name you chose to ignore. She nodded. I know. Her voice was small. Honest. I believed she meant it. Then I turned to Ethan's mother. You sat across from me for years. Accepted every kindness I gave. Every dish. Every gesture. And never once did you offer me the truth. She started to speak. I raised my hand. You don't get to rewrite your silence. Finally, I turned to Ethan. His eyes were glassy now. Voice thin. Claire, I never meant to hurt you. But you did. Every day you let me believe I was the only one. Every night you came home full from another dinner, another lie. Every birthday, every miscarriage, every dinner I cooked for your mother, while you sat at another woman's table. He buried his face in his hands. I felt nothing. You say you didn't know how to end it? You could have started by telling the truth. By choosing dignity over convenience. He looked up. I didn't want to lose my son. That made me pause. Then you should have respected his mother. He stood and tried to approach me, hands outstretched in desperation, but I stepped back, not in fear but in resolve. You used my grace as your permission slip. But grace isn't a blank check, Ethan. It runs out. His mother shifted in her seat. The weight of the moment seemed to finally dawn on her. For once she didn't defend him. She didn't defend anyone. Alex wasn't there that day. I wanted this moment for myself. But I left a letter for them all. Folded and placed on the table after my words. Inside it read, I will no longer carry your shame. I am not a side note in my own life. I am the author of the next chapter, and you are not welcome in the dedication. Marissa stood to leave first. She looked at me and said softly, I don't blame you if you never forgive me. I nodded. But I do blame you if you let your daughter believe this was love. She swallowed hard and left. Ethan's mother stood next. No apology, but no protest either. Maybe for her that was the closest thing to remorse she could offer. She looked around the house, at the framed photos of Alex, at the silence that screamed louder than words, and nodded almost imperceptibly before walking out. Finally Ethan stood. I don't know who I am without you, he said. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Then it's time you find out. Without using me as the mirror. He opened his mouth to speak again, but I had already turned away. I wouldn't let my name be spoken in that house as if it still belonged to him. They left, one by one. And when the door shut for the last time, I didn't cry. I turned on music. I poured myself a glass of wine. I folded the documents into a folder labeled Future, and placed it in the drawer where I used to keep his sweaters. Because some endings are quiet. And some victories come not with applause, but with peace. I lit a candle that night. Not for them. For me. For the girl I used to be before his love deluded her into silence. For the woman who endured. For the mother who stayed strong. For the future self I was just beginning to meet. I stood at the mirror and looked at my own face. Not through the lens of how he once saw me, but how I could now see myself. Clear-eyed. Sharp. Worthy. I realized I didn't need validation from the people who used me. I needed to validate myself. And I had. Later that evening, Alex came home. He saw the empty cups, the folder on the table, the calm in my face. They came. They did. And you? I stayed. He smiled. And I saw it, the hope in his eyes. We sat on the couch side by side. He leaned his head on my shoulder and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mom." And that moment was more healing than any revenge could offer. 'Cause I wasn't just seen. I was respected. I was whole. And I was finally free. Freedom is a beautiful thing. Until the silence becomes too loud. After that final confrontation, I spent the next few weeks in a haze of solitude. Not sadness. Just unfamiliar peace. The kind of quiet that creeps in after the storm clears. The kind that forces you to hear your own thoughts again. Raw and without distraction. I started small. Decluttering. Organizing closets, drawers, digital files. I donated bags of clothes, mostly his. I rearranged furniture. I painted the guest room a soft sage green. For the first time, I wasn't decorating around someone else's taste. I was learning mine. Then came the garden. I pulled weeds with a vengeance. Ripped roots from the ground like they were symbols of all the buried truths I'd lived with. I planted new life in their place. Lavender, rosemary, white roses. My hands were blistered by the second day, but I didn't care. That pain felt earned. Healing doesn't come in grand declarations. It comes in tiny acts of reclamation. I began journaling each morning. 10 minutes, no filter. Some days it was just lists. Other days, grief poured out like ink. Memories I hadn't let myself process. The miscarriage. The anniversaries I'd spent alone. The way Ethan's mother used to correct me when I told stories at the dinner table. I allowed myself to feel it all. Then I folded the page and left it in a wooden box labeled Past. Because that's where it belonged. Alex started noticing the difference in me. Not just in my routines but in my energy. "Mom," he said one night over dinner, "you're lighter." I smiled. That's what happens when you stop carrying other people's sins. We talked more openly now. About his childhood. About the things he'd seen even when we thought he wasn't looking. "I used to wonder why you stayed," he admitted. "I stayed because I thought love meant endurance," I said. "Now I know it means truth." One Saturday I took a class. Interior Design Basics. Just a free weekend session at the community center. But it sparked something in me. I'd spent my life building everyone else's home. Maybe it was time I built something of my own. So I started researching, sketching, watching tutorials. I created mood boards, repainted walls, took on small gigs for friends, redesigning a nursery, helping someone stage a home for sale. My name started to circulate. By month 4, I registered a small business, Second Light Interiors. The tagline? Spaces that remember who you are. Because I did. I remembered. And I made sure every project I took had heart. I worked with widows downsizing from empty houses. Divorced mothers seeking a fresh start. I poured their pain into design plans, always ending in joy. I became not just a decorator, but a quiet healer. Ethan called once. It was short. "Claire," he said, "I saw your business website. It's beautiful." "Thank you," I said calm. "I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry." There was a time those words would have cracked me open. Now they felt like dust brushing past a closed window. I hope you find peace, Ethan, I said. But I already did. Click. One day, I visited the house Marissa used to live in. It was empty now. Cleaned out. The mailbox still bore my last name. I walked the perimeter checking gutters, noting repairs. Not out of spite, but because it was mine. It had always been mine. A neighbor peeked over the fence. New owner, she asked. No, I said, smiling. Just the rightful one. I eventually sold the property. Used the funds to invest in my business, open a small design studio, and start a college fund for Alex. He didn't ask for it. But I needed to give him something untainted. Something that came from love, not debt. I kept a photo of that deed in my office. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the truth finds its way back, no matter how deeply it's buried. Marissa never contacted me again. I didn't expect her to. Some women exit gracefully. Others disappear into the silence they once kept. And honestly, I was okay either way. I didn't need an apology. I needed peace. And peace finally came. 6 months later, I hosted a dinner. Just me, Alex, my closest friends, and a few new clients who had become family. I cooked. Set the table with handmade place cards. Lit candles that smelled like rose and cedar. At the center of the table, I placed a single framed quote. The woman who rebuilds herself is more dangerous than the man who broke her. They toasted to me that night. Not as a wife, but as a woman. A builder. A mother. A survivor. And as we laughed under soft lights, I realized something. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. Felt alive. Because I had filled it with something no man could take, myself. After everyone left that night, I sat in the living room with Alex. The lights dimmed, the dishes done. He turned to me, a glass of sparkling water in hand, and asked, "Do you ever miss him?" I thought for a moment. No, I said. But I do miss the version of me who once believed he would change. We sat in silence. Would you ever love again? He asked. Maybe, I answered. But only if it feels like freedom. Not a favor. He nodded, and I saw something in his eyes, peace. Not just for me, but for him too. The boy who watched his mother disappear into a marriage of slow erasure had now seen her come back to life. Not as someone new, but as someone fully returned to herself. And that, I knew, was the legacy worth leaving. 3 days after that dinner, I did something I hadn't done in years. I booked a solo weekend away. No schedule. No obligations. Just me, a rented cabin in the hills, and silence that belonged to no one else. The first morning, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the cabin's bedroom. There was no makeup, no filtered lighting, no flattering angles, just me. And for the first time in over a decade, I didn't flinch. I studied the lines around my eyes. The streak of silver in my hair, I hadn't bothered to dye. The softness around my stomach. The strength in my shoulders. This was the woman Ethan never truly saw. This was the woman I once abandoned to be palatable. Manageable. Small. Not anymore. I walked outside and sat on the porch, notebook in hand. I began writing letters. Not to Ethan. Not to Marissa. Not even to Alex. I wrote to myself. To the girl who stayed silent during her miscarriage because she didn't want to burden him. To the young bride who thought she had to earn love with service. To the woman who quietly paid for a house she wasn't allowed to call hers. I forgave her. Then I wrote one final letter. To the woman I had become. You are the fire that rose from your own ashes. You are not defined by what you endured, but by what you built from it. And I promise, I will never leave you behind again. When I came home, I framed that letter and placed it in the hallway, right across from the mirror. A new ritual began. Every morning before coffee, before calls, I stood in front of it. Not to critique. Not to fix. Just to witness. Because that's what I'd needed all along. To be witnessed. To be seen without being used. And slowly I began to understand what power truly looked like. Not domination. Not noise. But knowing who you are when no one is clapping. And still standing tall. Alex graduated high school that spring. I watched him cross the stage in his cap and gown, smiling the widest I'd ever seen him. I didn't need to look around for Ethan. He wasn't invited. When Alex gave his short valedictory speech, he said, "Everything I know about strength, I learned from watching someone rebuild. Not a business, not a house, but herself." He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. Every mother in the crowd turned to look at me, and I let the tears fall. Not from sadness, but from recognition. After the ceremony, Alex found me outside. "I meant you," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "And I meant every moment that brought us here." He hugged me, tighter than he had in years. I felt his shoulders relax like he too had been holding a weight he didn't know how to name. In that embrace, I felt generations of silence shatter. I felt lineage correct itself. I felt my mother's ghost, my grandmother's shadow, the bloodline of women who swallowed pain instead of speaking it, finally exhale. One day, I received a message from a woman I'd never met. She had found my business online and read an interview I'd done for a local magazine. "I'm leaving my husband," she wrote. "And I just want you to know, it was your story that reminded me I still had a voice." I cried again. Because that's what healing does. It doesn't just close wounds. It teaches others how to tend to theirs. Another message followed weeks later. Then another. A single mother. A widow rebuilding her life. A woman who had been financially controlled for decades. They saw themselves in me. And for once I didn't feel the urge to downplay my story. I shared. I guided. I listened. Pain, it turns out, can become a bridge when you stop being ashamed of your own. We started a group. A circle of women. Once a month. Some in person, others on Zoom. We called it the mirror table. Because we weren't fixing each other. We were simply reflecting back what had been there all along. Worth, power, voice. It's been 2 years now. The house is different. New paint. New art. New laughter. Alex is in college. He calls often. Always ends with, "Love you, Mom. Keep shining." And I do. Not for anyone else. Not to prove anything. But because I finally remembered who I am. I'm not just the woman who was lied to. I'm not just the legal wife who was erased. I am the architect of my own peace. The author of my own name. I've made my home into a sanctuary. For myself and for others. I host Sunday brunches. I mentor young women starting over. I've been invited to speak at 2 women's conferences, and next spring, I'll launch a podcast called The Room I Built. A space for stories like mine. This time my voice won't be erased. It will echo. And when people ask, what was the turning point? I say this. It was the day I stopped waiting for an apology and started writing my own permission slip. And every time I pass that mirror I nod. Not because I love everything I see, but because I finally recognize her. You made it. You're here. And you're not going anywhere. Because I'm not just surviving. I'm living. And this is what freedom sounds like. If you've ever been made to feel invisible, if you've ever built a life around someone who never truly saw you, know this. You are not alone, and your story isn't over. Whether you're rebuilding after betrayal, reclaiming your name, or just learning to look in the mirror again, there is strength in your silence and even more in your voice. Tell me in the comments, what's one part of yourself you're taking back this year? And if this story found you at the right time, don't forget to like, share, or just leave a yellow heart, so I know you're out there, still rising.